Hello and welcome to a new video of the world beyond the ice walls, the second ring beyond the ice walls. This is Italian P&C talking, and before we start this video, I just gotta say, today it's not a good day for me. I have a pretty good cough and I have somewhat of a throat ache, so my voice might not sound the best, and that's just like a little advert for you guys, just so you know. But that won't stop me from making this video, which I've been prolonging for long enough, and it's been a while since I wanted to do this. I've done my research and I want to get right into it. So for newcomers, what is this? What am I looking at? As always, small recap before we get into the topics of this video. This is the world beyond these walls. This is a map that uses a specific type of projection. Well, it's not really flat earth projection, but it is some sort of like projection that makes it so that the landmasses can be displayed in this way. That explains that beyond the ice walls, that would be Antarctica, there are more landmasses to explore and to know about, and there has been multiple episodes made of the series by me that explain in detail every single detail of these landmasses. And we had two series. One was the ones that were about the first ring beyond the ice walls, which, following Antarctica that has 4 gates that open, have all these landmasses in the first ring that we discovered in the first series. And now we're doing the second season, where we discover the lands in Akupara, which is the name used to define this second ring beyond the ice walls, even bigger than the first one, that shows even more landmasses in great detail, even describing their physiological features, their historical features. But while the first original series also dwelled on political topics, or rather geopolitical, explaining the states that existed in these lands and characters of them, in the second map, which is the one we're using now, that describes the second ring, we don't have that. So we have to do our own research, which I'm doing for you in this case. Learning about these topics, basing myself on the names and the descriptions, and trying to point and unite all these topics together so that we have a very big view of this entire topic. So now that we know a bit of it, in case of you not knowing already, because you're a new viewer, or simply because you wanted to just rehear about this one more time, then let's get into what we've been doing last episode. So we've been going in this direction. I don't remember if this is counterclockwise or clockwise. I'm not really sure. I never managed to remember this, but I think it's counterclockwise. So we've been going counterclockwise, starting from this area right here, World Room, and learning about all these continents here one by one, step by step, every single episode. And now, after doing the Titanic Forest, the Land of Giants, Sequoyah, or Forest of Giants, Sequoyah, and Oracula, the Lands of Prophets, as well as the Yokuruna Sea Forest, and Asclepia, the Living Hospital, we have arrived to this area of the map, which is what we will be covering in this episode. I've already done a lot of research for this, and you might already see some things you might already know, depending on how well versed you are on these topics. But that said, I think we can finally give a start to this episode. Once again, I'm trying to make these episodes right between like 2 other types of videos, so that I don't just like store you guys with just this series, because I know it can get boring even if it is extremely interesting to dwell upon. But you know, after all, I do have more projects going on, so we do have those like shorter types of videos where I kind of like blind react to maps, like the one I just made last time, or the ones where I delve into topics that have been recognized a lot in this kind of community. But also I have other like long-standing series, like the one of Nostradamus Terra Infinita map, which by the way has not been gaining a lot of traction lately, and I personally have had more and more trouble trying to like actually go on with it, because I can find less and less information on the planes of existence that are shown on that map. So I think we might be closing up with that one, but we will talk about it in the next episode of that one whenever it comes out. Now let's focus on this one. So the first topic we'll be going on to, and the first continent we'll be looking, is the thing called Greater Lemuria, the fertile graveyard. So first of all, we can see exactly where it is positioned on the map. We have it right on the top right of the map, aka the east of the map, in the northeast of the map. We have it right near to the ones we saw last episode, but it is very much itself a continent of its own, not connected to any of the ones we looked at last time. It is also differently positioned when it comes to the wastes. The wastes are seen as these like landmasses that actually are themselves like sign of like the end of the world, like what you would describe as the end of the world, you know? We have a sea, we have a continent, and then we have these wastes. We've traveled through the scorched wastes, we've seen the irradiated wastes, we've seen the walls of Asgard, which are a bit different, and we've seen the Titanic Forest, which, while it does sound kind of interesting, it is also itself a wasteland. And now we're getting into this area right here, the Frozen Wastes. So the continent of Greater Lemuria is positioned right here. So before we get right into what exactly this is, I gotta say, if you guys know what Lemuria is, you know you're in for a treat. Because Lemuria itself, by the word itself, you should know that this has very much links to history and theories of their own and stuff about sunken continents. And let's get right into what I'm saying, because this is extremely interesting. And if I don't remember incorrectly, I might already have made, actually yes, I do remember it correctly, and I have made a video where, along many other topics, I did talk about in detail, and not much detail, but some detail about Lemuria, and that was the video about the lost lands iceberg, something like that. I think the second episode of that, or if not, I will link this in the description down below, so if you want to watch it and learn more about Lemuria in the historical context of it, then you can go and watch that, since I already talked about this. But this is like a completely different view of it, because obviously it's in the context of the Beyond the Aswall series, so it's a completely different kind of perception of it and where it is positioned and what it is really about. But before we keep going with that, let's just analyze the name very quickly. We have Greater Lemuria, and then right here we have Lemuria. So we can see these are two different landmasses, although they are very near to each other, but we have Great Lemuria being of course the larger one, and then Lemuria, and these also have their own descriptions. In the case of Lemuria, it is the Forsaken Empire, written right here. In the case of Greater Lemuria, it is the Fertile Graveyard. So these will be descriptions that will be analyzed later, after we get into the historical context of Lemuria itself. So first of all, what are we talking about when we say Lemuria? Well, Lemuria has a lot of historical analyses that have been made throughout the years, and it all kind of starts by a man called Philip Sclater. This is an English zoologist that in 1864 was researching the fossils and generally just the creatures, the animals, fauna that lived in Madagascar, the island of Madagascar. Also, let's just get on it map-wise so we know what we're talking about. The island of Madagascar, the southern parts of the subcontinent of India, actually, and then the islands that exist in the Indian Ocean, and finally even Australia and Africa. And while he was seeing the fauna of these places, he noticed that there was very much a similarity between the creatures that lived in these places. Of course, mainly, and we'll see of course because of the name, mainly lemurs. Lemurs being those little creatures, little critters that look like primates kind of, but they're a bit different and they're very small, and they live, well, most people know them because they live in Madagascar, but sort of them and different kinds of them also live near the southern tip of India, the archipelagos that are existing in the Indian Ocean, and all the way right here. So he tried to understand how a species that was so similar could live in these three places despite all of them being very, very distant one from the other. Of course, Madagascar wasn't connected to anything. These islands were literally thousands of kilometers apart, the hundreds of kilometers apart, and of course these two places were completely different, and before human contact, which brought with itself ships and stuff like that, it wouldn't be explained how these creatures could traverse such source of land altogether. So the theory that he made was that once upon a time, in a very, very distant past, there was a landmass that connected all these three places, a large landmass that connected these three places, where these creatures lived normally in each part, and of course spread around an entire area. This was also confirmed by types of birds that existed in all these places, of course birds being able to fly, so that's a bit different, but also the local flora, so the plants, once again not very able to spread unless you count with wind, but once again that depends on the plant. Some plants don't have just seeds that can be spread in that way. So this was very interesting as a theory. This was before the theory of continental plates was made and before people started believing in that, which explained it in a different way, aka that all these continents kind of like merged together and like created Pangaea, which was the supercontinent that held them all together, and then spread apart, aka why some of these places were united in the past and then not again united. So this was before that. And in this context, when that wasn't discovered, the concept of a single continent and a single landmass being sunken in the ocean wasn't that far from the truth. We had examples of this even in Europe. The part between the British Isles and the rest of Europe was called Doggerland, and it was this area right here which used to be in fact land, and this was very much well known by that point in time. So seeing that, and seeing of course the legends of places like Atlantis, it wasn't too far away to be believed that a landmass this big could exist in the Indian Ocean. Now, where this gets a bit crazy is the fact that this theory, which was started as, again, by this like zoologist, this English zoologist, which by the way was able to traverse and explore all these places because during that time, 1864, the British Empire was still in its full high point, and it controlled both India, coastal regions of Africa, and had a large influence in the Indian Ocean. And at that point, India was also, of course, ruled by the British Raj, which was the colony that the British had established in India. And the people that are called the Tamils, which are a specific ethnic group that lives in the southern tip of India, the Indian subcontinent, and the northern part of Sri Lanka, also called the island of Ceylon, basically started uniting this theory of the zoologist, which that by that point spread in the higher circles of these cultures, to one that existed in the far past. So Tamil and Sanskrit accounts called upon a South Indian landmass that was lost to the ocean. And there were two cities that were made in ancient times, built in ancient times, and that were in this hypothetical, or well, not hypothetical, more like lost landmass, which were called Tenmadurai and Katapapuram. And these two cities were recorded in multiple texts, but were lost to the ocean. Then again, we have things like the Katalko, which is the word that was used and was made by these cultures to define the seizure by ocean, or sometimes seizure by tsunami. So that meant something that existed in the landmass and then was taken by the sea. And this was roughly in the first millennium before Christ that these were mentioned in the records of the Pandyan kings, which were the kings that ruled the area all around that time, very, very far away in the past, which were of course an early Tamil dynasty. So all of this kind of fits together into creating some sort of like congruent theory that would make sense at first glance. And of course there's also references to this in South Asian literary works from the ages of the Middle Ages and even antiquity. In fact, the popular Hindu flood myth of Manu, the lord of the Dravida, so South India, Dravidia, Dravidians, and so on, these kind of words refer usually to the southern part of India, roughly around this line, but yeah. Well, they were written in antiquity and then they were referenced in the Middle Ages, and they all refer to this lost landmass. So all of this kind of created a sort of theory that was picked up by the Indian Civil Service officer Charles D. McLowan, and he theorized that Lemuria not only just existed, but it was also the original homeland of the Dravidians, the southern Indians basically, and the theory spread in nationalist Tamil circles and was starting to call Lemuria Kumari Nadu, aka the territory of Kumari, which meant basically that this entire landmass, which once again I have to just show you how big it was, and it is comparable when you put it like that to the one we're looking about right here, this entire landmass was the origin point of the people of southern India, and it basically explained this huge landmass that was lost. So now that we have the historical context kind of put together, let's try to figure out how that connects with the Beyond the Ice Walls map, and how a territory which was clearly much linked to the Indian Ocean can be put in the Ocean of Destiny. That's how this place is called, but in the second ring beyond the Ice Walls. So there have been multiple theories about this, of course the most probable being simply that the position of Lemuria might have been wrong. While they thought that it was a place in the Indian Ocean, it was instead beyond the Ice Walls, and they traveled way further to actually find this landmass and arrive to South Asia when basically the flood myth was created. Another theory could be that the landmass itself was like some sort of teletransportation that basically appeared here and then suddenly disappeared here, hence why the cities of Tenmadurai and Katapapuram were lost and reappeared here. And then again, we have to take into account that this area was recorded to have kings and emperors, so it wasn't a tribal area with no sort of civilization on it, which wasn't recorded in history. No, it was like a recorded place, so people knew about it in some sort of fashion. Now, of course, we could be saying that this is confusing ourselves with other landmasses that were lost in South India. In fact, we do know that places like the Maldives were in fact connected to the Indian subcontinent in the far past, as well as Sri Lanka was all the way to the Middle Ages before the bridge that connected India to Sri Lanka was lost after a tsunami. And if we connect that to other theories, we could just say that, the continent of Lemuria is nothing but like a place of fiction that was like created for nationalist rhetoric, while the real Lemuria might have already existed, but it was lost to the multiple tsunamis that affected the area, and it was not as large as the original one was intended to be. But in this map, the result of this kind of theory is another one. Lemuria does exist, and it is instead two places. There's a smaller Lemuria and a greater Lemuria, and they both exist, just not inside of the ice walls. In fact, they were always in the area outside of the ice walls. In fact, very far away from the ice walls. Not only it is not inside of the ice walls, but it's not in the spirit ring beyond the ice walls, and not in the Atlas, as is called this area right here, but instead all the way into Akupara, aka the second ring. Which to me sounds a bit crazy, but it's an interesting topic. Either way, Lemuria has always fascinated me as soon as I discovered about it, and just another option to talk about it is a great point to make. Also, we have these descriptions that I'm just gonna mention very quickly. The Forsaken Empire. Of course, if we go by the theory that this is a landmass that was kind of teleported to another place, then it would make sense for this to be the description. These people, the Lemurians, that were originally here, were literally transported here and forced to create a civilization from the start in an area that was not connected to any place where living life was established, and had to start all over again to create a civilization. And then probably they colonized the area called the Greater Lemuria, which was even larger. In fact, my theory is that, well, not my theory according to this map basically is that the real Lemuria is this, and the Lemuria that was originally here and fits with size, it was teleported right here beyond the ice walls, and then the people that were here found this like virgin continent, as it's usually called when a landmass is not explored by any humans. And they found these virgin lands to explore and to colonize, and finally Greater Lemuria was incorporated in this Forsaken Empire, this old Lemurian Empire, which at this point might have fallen, we don't know, but we do know that at some point it existed according to the Sanskrit chronicles. Then again, we have this description, the fertile graveyard. What would the fertile graveyard refer to? There's multiple theories we could say, but my favorite one is basically that creatures that exist in Lemuria have a very level of biodiversity because of the large size of this landmass. So as you can see, you can have like all the biomes here. We have all the way from frigid wastelands right here to like tundra, taiga, then we have mountain chains here, deserts, we have arid lands, we have, I don't know what exactly this is, but probably plains, then we have coastal areas, we have jungles, we have like rainforests right here. So all of these like biomes make together to make one of the most biodiverse areas in the world, which would make sense considering the large sizes and the place it is pointed at. And with that, being able to connect with the creatures that already lived in Lemuria, it will make this kind of like a huge graveyard of different types of creatures, which of course would be the case as most is when new life forms are introduced to an already existing habitat, and this entire fauna would go eventually extinct because it would be like taken over by the one that was brought on by the Lemurians, or by whatever described this place. Of course, we can't know if this is the right theory. This might be just the original place of Lemuria, and in that case I'm not really sure what the fertile graveyard could be supposed to represent. But with that said, I think we did do a good job of explaining the entire concept of Lemuria and Greater Lemuria and so on and so forth. Yeah, just I love talking about Lemuria. I love this concept that there was a huge continent here. I actually like it way more than the continent of Mu, which is another sunken landmass that was hypothesized to exist usually in the Pacific, and I actually like it more than Atlantis because I think Atlantis is most probably in the eye of the Sahara, as I mentioned in the last episode as well, or maybe it wasn't in the last episode, but a couple episodes ago, whatever, a video. Which, by the way, if you don't know, I also made a video about the eye of the Sahara, but it's very old and it was in the context of my 10,000 BCE series where I described the world in 10,000 BCE. Okay, now that we did Lemuria and Greater Lemuria, let's get to the next topic. Here we have the island of Patmos, which description is the Fortress of Yakub. While the contents of Greater Lemuria and Lemuria were much interesting even in their sizes and just geographical features, the continent of Patmos, if it can even be called a continent, I wouldn't, it's probably just an island, is a bit different. So, what is the Fortress of Yakub? Who is Yakub? Some of you might already know this, some of you might not, and some have no idea what is going on. Yakub is a figure in the Nation of Islam. Okay, so this is kind of wild, okay? You have to, this is on the map. You can see this on the map. I had to do the research for this. Fortunately, I already knew who Yakub was, because it's been kind of relevant in this kind of community recently to talk about the Nation of Islam talking points. But for those that do not know, the Nation of Islam, before we get into Yakub, the Nation of Islam is like a kind of religious group that exists in the United States and hasn't really spread much further. And this group kind of reinvents the religion of Islam to follow more like a black nationalist kind of theory, or at least a theory that kind of makes the religion of Islam focused on black people, basically. It's kind of complicated to explain. Malcolm X, which probably most of you should know, was one of those figures that really embraced Nation of Islam theory, but then kind of he didn't follow it all the way through. In fact, when he converted to Sunni Islam, which is the mainstream version of Islam, he kind of stopped really caring about this kind of rhetoric and started just following the mainstream one, because Nation of Islam is very much an American themed kind of historical view of Islam. It's very focused on the condition of the African American people of the United States, and it's usually not very favorable to the white people of the United States. In fact, it's usually kind of against it. It was kind of formulated in that era where African Americans were much more discriminated in the US, more than now, of course, during Jim Crow era. So it kind of makes sense in that context, but then again, it is much followed even nowadays. So that is I had to just give you a small explanation for what I'm about to say, because it kind of sounds insane if you don't have the context for it. So now that you have the context for it, let's delve into this entire Yakub thing. So Yakub, the name is of a person. This person being the Arabic variant of the name of Jacob. Jacob, yes indeed, that Jacob, the Jacob from the Bible, the biblical figure who started the tribes of Israel. In fact, according to Nation of Islam logic, the tribes of Israel were white, and they were created by Yakub, which is Jacob. And the whole story of how they were created and how they ended up in Patmos is an interesting one, but also kind of insane. Let me get into it. So, Yakub, by the Nation of Islam, was a black scientist, okay, who lived 6,000 years ago and created the white race. He created the white race. I'm not kidding, this is what the Nation of Islam says, okay? First recorded the story of Yakub was by the founder of the Nation of Islam, which was Wallace Fard Muhammad. So the first record was this, but the historical explanation is that it derives by some event that happened in the Middle Ages when a Moorish king kind of captured 40,000 white Castilians from Spain during the Middle Ages, because Spain was under Muslim control in the area of modern-day Andalusia, so southern Spain, and they captured these 40,000 Castilians, and somehow this translated into this theory being born. At least that's the historical consensus. But let's get into the the story of Yakub, because this is an interesting character. Whether or not he's real or not, I think it's like relevant to actually say what this guy made according to the Nation of Islam. So he was born near the city of Mecca, which, in case you don't know, Mecca is the holy city of Islam, like, you know, Islam, and it is right here. And yeah, so he was born right around here, near Medina and Mecca, and he was in the tribe of Shabazz. He was ridiculed and he was called Big Head by the other people of this area because of his extremely large and deformed cranium, so his head, and he was a genius boy. He was like extremely intelligent, and he quickly mastered basic physics by the age of 6, according to this tradition. And all of this despite being hated by the community in Mecca that thought he was extremely arrogant. By the early stages of adulthood, he acquired all the knowledge stored in Mecca and planned with it to dominate the entire world. How? Well, through creating a new being that could trick and outsmart the Black Meccans, enough to rule them, using something called tricknology, which was supposed to be that derived from tricking others into submission. I'm not making this up. This is like nationalist Nation of Islam lore, okay? I'm not trying to like create a random theory. This is their thing, okay? I'm not saying this is true, just making that very clear. I'm not saying this is true. I go into very interesting theories on this channel, but this is one of the, I think, most controversial ones, because I really do not say this is true, okay? I'm just saying what they say. So he wanted to create a white race, basically, to enslave the Black Meccans, to go back to them and rule them, because they made fun of him for having a big head, basically, and because they just hated him because he was very arrogant. So he took with him 59,999 followers, because he like established a cult following throughout his years at Mecca, and sailed all across Africa to find a place suitable to start his experiment. In official Nation of Islam lore, he basically did the entire travel across Africa and went all the way into the Aegean Sea and arrived to the island of Patmos in Greece. Somewhere here. I don't know where the island of Patmos is, but it's in Greece, basically. And in the island of Patmos, he started his experiment, which involved the practice of grafting, which was basically outbreeding certain genetical traits in his followers across multiple centuries and generations to create this new being. And again, according to this lore, after he died, his followers kept going for 600 years until the new race was born, the white race. So literally, this is how, according to him, the white race was born. And when I say white race, I literally mean white people. So according to the Nation of Islam, white people did not exist until like 1,000 years before Christ. They did not exist, okay? And they were created by Yakub, which is Jacob. And he also created Jews, which are also white people, according, again, to the Nation of Islam. So, yeah, if you were confused and angry, I get you, and I wouldn't say I'm confused, because at this point, this is not the first time I've heard about this, and I'm not the first time that I researched it, because every time I research this, it gets more crazy, and I get more context, and it makes even less sense than it makes last time. But this is all part of the Nation of Islam lore, which they do believe as in a religion. Kind of like how people that believe in the Bible in the literal sense believe that, like, I don't know, the Pharaoh, like, wand became a snake, something like that. I don't remember exactly what happened, but it was something like that in the Old Testament. When he was, like, being confronted by Moses, by the way. That's what I'm referring to. Anyways, why is the island of Patmos here and not in Greece? That is because, according to the map of Beyond the Ice Walls, the island of Patmos was not in Greece. In fact, the original name of the island, according to Black Nation of Islam lore, is that it was the island of Pelias, something that is not real in Greece, like it doesn't exist, and Patmos was just the name added to it later, and it was identified with the island in Greece. And this map shows that this is not true. There is no identification with a real existing island inside of the ice walls. Instead, to create this entire experiment and this entire phase, Yakub traveled all the way beyond the ice walls to reach Patmos. So, according to the lore of Beyond the Ice Walls, Yakub wasn't like a Meccan, he was actually a Lemurian. And he was part of the people that lived in the Empire of Lemurian. And he was, a scientist, one that dwelled into genetic, basically breeding and stuff like this, and wanted to create a new being, new race, aka the white race, but not like white race as the one that exists on Earth, a literal white race, like white as in the color white, which could live in the frozen wastes. And he did this by getting to Lemuria, and once he got to Lemuria, he wanted to have his own place to create this experiment with his followers, and after he taught to the sovereigns of Lemuria all he learned in his travels to Mecca, he was allowed to settle in the island of Patmos, which is the name given to this island right here next to the Straits of the Frozen Wastes, and then he could start this experiment. So yeah, this is basically the lore of Patmos, a Fortress of Yakub, and the reason it's a fortress is because nobody can get to it. Nobody is allowed to get to Patmos, because according to this lore, Yakub is still alive. Somehow he managed to keep itself alive. Now this is very crazy, and I don't really believe much of this, and yeah, but it's still very interesting, even as a concept. Nation of Islam lore, Nation of Islam like tradition, religious tradition, is definitely some of the wildest stuff that I've encountered in my research, but it's not that far off to like some other religions that existed basically before the main monotheistic religions. So it's not too incredible, there's wilder stuff out there. With that said, let's get to the last topic of this video, which is the frozen wastes themselves. So, frozen wastes, what are those? Where are they? Okay, first of all, they're right here. They're huge. They might be the biggest part of the wastes in the entire map. I think the only place that rivals them is the Walls of Asgard. Apart of them, they are literally the longest and most expansive wastes in the entire map. They are an almost never-ending surface of ice, covered rough terrain, with no mountains or natural formations, and once you land in the frozen wastes, your eyes will see nothing but white for the next thousands of kilometers, making it impossible for anybody to navigate this landmass. Any attempt would result in either death by freezing or death by getting lost and dying of natural causes, aka starvation, once again freezing, or illnesses. So it is literally impossible to traverse. The moment you land on the frozen wasteland, unless you go right back, it's over for you. You are done for. It's unexplorable. It's like the ice walls and the mountain ring are nothing compared to the frozen wastes. And I would say for now, they probably are the most dangerous of the wastes. Maybe only comparable to the irradiated waste, which of course, being irradiated, they are toxic, so you can't really go there. But, frozen waste just as bad because it's basically impossible to travel. Apart from one specific situation. The only research that has been able to map up the borders of the frozen wastes has been conducted by a crew of unknown sailors from inside the ice walls, who believing to have reached the end of the world when they arrived to the island of Patmos and this opening here on the frozen wastes, were surprised to see that the opening of a large waterway in between the Straits of Patmos kept going with their ship. So they straight up went from Patmos, they were going through this coast right here, and they kept going in this area right here. And once again, they kept going, and to this extremely short straits, arrived in a place called the Spotlight Sea. On the other side of the long strait, there was a huge circular inland sea, lightly colored thanks to the star-like light form that hovered right above it. So you have to imagine that this place is not like completely in the dark, as most other wastes are, but there's a light source that literally is right here, and it manages to make them basically see everything that is right in the Spotlight Sea, hence, by the way, the name Spotlight Sea. This light form allowed for life to flourish inside of the water, as the sailors were able to see gigantic creatures surfacing from the water at a distance, maybe related to the Leviathan of the Serpent Gate. Once again, let's go back to the first ring, and we can see that the ice walls have the Serpent's Gate, where very far ago in the past, we talked about the Leviathan, which was the creature which, by the way, had a biblical inspiration, which basically lived in this area right here. And in this Frozen Wastes, we can see its cousin, basically. It's like a neighboring species which lives in the Spotlight Sea, but it is literally hundreds of meters long. An enormous creature. Incredibly huge. Despite this, the creatures wanted no sort of contact with humans and would retreat at the slightest sight of human approach. Hence, the sailors came back and basically went back into the ice walls. And that's it for the Frozen Wastes. We don't know anything about them more. Maybe there's something hidden in the ice that covers all of it, but since we can't travel them because it's certain death, we will never know. It's interesting that a formation like the Spotlight Sea is, and we don't know really what this light source that exists right upon it can be. This was probably one of the best episodes I've done so far, just for the entire Lemuria thing and the Yakub thing. I think personally these are one of the most interesting topics that I talked about when covering this map. Of course, we've seen places like Awas, that was very interesting. We've seen people like Presser John with Azania, but something like Yakub, it's basically insane theories that have spawned from the Nation of Islam, represented in a map of Beyond the Ice Walls, are something that I take upon very close to me. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you were able to learn something from it and were just interested in the topics I've discussed. Once again, just for the record, I don't really believe in this Nation of Islam stuff, but it's still part of the map, so you have to talk about it, and I'm sure you guys were interested in it as well. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you guys are interested in the series and want me to keep going, as I will definitely keep going, and I'd love to see your support every time I put on a new video of Beyond the Ice Walls, especially in this new part of the series. And I hope you guys can like and subscribe to the channel and comment to spread the video in the algorithm. And see you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.